Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Texas Stories. We're back in our virtual series brought to you by ArtSpark Texas. This is a series where we're going to look at a lot of different art projects that are going on around Texas and kind of take a tour around Austin, our home city, and all parts of Texas. This week, we'll be taking an inspiration from Texas SandFest, which is an annual event hosted in Port Aransas, Texas. And we'll be learning how to make clay from the dirt that's in our yard. We'll actually make a clay pot from dirt that you'll dig out of your own yard, which I think will be really fun. As always, you'll need some supplies, but the supplies this week will look a bit more industrial. We're going to need 2 buckets. These could be 2-gallon, 5-gallon, 4-gallon buckets, but we'll need 2 larger size buckets, a shovel, the dirt that you'll dig from your yard, a strainer or colander, and an old pillowcase that you don't mind getting quite dirty. Our first step in creating our clay pottery is just to get a little inspiration from the Texas SandFest video. I've included the link above in the upper right hand corner. Just click on that link and it'll give you a lot more information about this annual festival. Now that you've watched that video, you've got a better understanding of Texas SandFest. I wish we could all go to the beach and build sand sculptures ourselves, but unfortunately we don't have those resources available. What we do have is dirt. And so I thought we could use our dirt to create some clay and mold that clay into a pot. So here are the steps in that process. We'll start by filling our bucket with dirt from our yard. Then we'll water that dirt. In step 3, we'll separate the clay from the dirt by watering it and mixing it. Then we'll prepare our clay. We've got to let it dry out a bit before we can use it. And finally, we'll create a sculpture from that clay. In this case, we'll be making a pinch pot. The final result will look something like this. You can see that I've made 3 pinch pots here. I had a lot of dirt, so I made a lot of clay. Let me walk you through that process. Okay, getting started with step 2. You'll need your bucket and your shovel. And you may want to think this through. Where in your yard or maybe in surrounding areas can you gather some dirt? I recommend not digging a hole in an area that you often walk, as you may step in that hole, and we don't want that for you. Now, clay is very unusual in that it is a fine-grained soil, and clay particles easily suspend in water. So if you're really going out searching for clay, you would probably look in dry riverbanks and areas like that. We're not really interested in going to those links though, and the dirt that you have in your yard is going to work just fine. We live in an area where there's quite a bit of loam, which is clay mixed with silt and sand, especially if you live in East Austin, and so we should have enough clay that we could gather from our soil to do this project. Okay, now that you've gathered about a half a bucket of dirt, and you'll notice that I filled over halfway. I think I have a little bit too much here. You're going to water that dirt. And so take out your hose pipe. Let's put some water on top of that dirt. We're really trying to saturate it. You'll notice the oxygen bubbles kind of coming to the surface here. And I'm going to use my shovel to stir this dirt. I really want to agitate it and get the clay particles, which are really light and will suspend easily in water. As I stir this, they will start to come to the surface. And basically they'll come to the top of this mix. I'll separate the sand and the silt. Hopefully they'll stay to the bottom, and I'll get the clay coming to the top surface. If you really want to get grounded as you're doing this project, go ahead and put your hands into that dirt, and you can break down the dirt with just your hands. Get it down to as fine particles as you can. As we said, the clay are going to be the lightest particles, so they're going to come to the top of the mix, and some of your heavier minerals in the soil are going to sink to the bottom. I'm going to speed this up just a bit, but the idea is that we water, we stir, and we'll allow it to sit for several hours, even a day after we've done this. Okay, so in step 3, I have let my dirt water mix sit for a day, allowing some of the water to evaporate off the top of the surface. Especially here in Texas, we get a lot of evaporation. I'll add a little more water back into the mix, and I'm going to stir it around one last time. Just really trying to get all those lighter clay particles to suspend in the water. and then I'm going to strain this through a strainer. Now you may be using a colander that you often use with spaghetti, and I promise this mud will wash right off. But we do need something to separate some of these thicker, heavier parts of the soil out from the clay. So I'm pouring my bucket through the colander, using that as a strainer to get out the clumps and especially any rocks that might still be stuck in the mix. I'm not going to pour all the mix because the bottom of the bucket is quite heavy and quite clumpy, and I don't want any of that to get into my final mix here. Okay, now in step 4, we've got our final mix. This is mostly clay and water. I'm going to pour off a little bit of the water that's on the very top, but in this final process, we're really filtering to get out all the water from our clay mix. The last step we filtered through the colander. Now we're going to filter again through the pillowcase. And a pillowcase is fairly porous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this mix into my old used pillowcase that I probably won't ever use again for pillows. I'm going to take it and stretch it over the bucket, over the lip of the bucket here. It actually fits on pretty nice on this 5-gallon bucket. And I'm going to just dump my mix into the pillowcase, trying to get the majority of it out of my bucket and into the pillowcase. And it's mud, so it's a bit sticky, but you'll probably get at least 75% of that into the pillowcase. So here I'm just squeezing the air out of the pillowcase, trying to get as much air out as possible. What we're going to do is take this pillowcase and hang it from a tree or hang it from any area. You can just tie a knot in the pillowcase and let it rest here. The clay needs between 36 and 48 hours to dry and for all the water to evaporate and to seep out of the bottom of the pillowcase. So go ahead and make sure you're planning for that when you're doing this project. After the long process of waiting, we finally have our clay ready. So this clay is rested for around 42 hours, and in taking it out of the bag, you'll start to feel that it's quite moist still, but obviously has a lot of the water evaporated out of that surface. And I made quite a bit of clay here. This is a big lump of clay. I had quite a lot of dirt in my bucket, and this actually is big enough for I can make 3 pinch pots. So I'll break this down into smaller pieces. On my work table here, I have a cup of water as well. This is just to reactivate the clay. When the clay gets too dry, it'll start to crack. So I can use a little water on my hands to just smooth out certain areas. I'm going to take my large lump and start to break it down now. And I'll show you the process of forming a simple pinch pot. Keep in mind that I am not a potter in any shape, form, and fashion. This is very new to me, but Texas Stories is about experimenting with new mediums, and this was just too fun to pass up on. So let's walk through that process of making a pinch pot. Let's start by taking our ball of clay and working it into a cube. You can do that by picking up the mound of clay and slamming it onto the table. Each time we slam it down on the table, what we're doing is flattening that side. I'm trying to make this into a cube. So taking the circle or the sphere of the clay and hammering that onto the table to make a cube. You'll notice that I'm doing this right onto these screws that are on my table. I don't notice that right away, but that's denting my clay. And so here, I finally realize it and move it onto a flatter surface of my table. This is going to get a bit messy, so pick an outside table if you have one, or if you're working inside, maybe lay down some newsprint or parchment paper to keep the clay from getting everywhere. Once you get a nice cube established, you're going to just gently take your palm and pat down those angles. So a cube obviously has these points on each corner, right? And we're going to pat those down. We want to take it back to a nice sphere. The idea of the sphere is that it's a rounded form. Then we'll take our thumb and we'll press into the clay. I literally have my thumb into the clay. I don't want to go all the way through because I want to leave the bottom of the clay there for the bottom of the pot. And once I get my thumb down in the clay, I can start working my way around the clay. I'm literally pinching and pulling into the palm of my hand. Pinching and pulling up, pinching and pulling up. thus the name pinch pot. I didn't realize it at first either, but it just dawned on me as I was doing it. As I said, I'm new to pottery. We'll speed this up a bit, but you can see that pinching motion that my hand's making, and I'm spinning the pot in my hand as I'm doing that. Just letting it, I want it to work evenly around the pot. The easiest way to do that is just to spin it in my two hands. I'm starting to get the shape formed now, and now I'll start pushing outward, trying to expand the opening of the top of the pot. And that causes my clay to crack a bit, but I'm going to use the water here in just a minute to smooth out some of those cracks. Now that I'm fairly confident with the shape of my pinch pot, I'm going to make sure that the base of my pot is flat. And I'm going to go in with some water to try to heal some of the cracks that have happened as I've worked the clay. You can get water on your hand and kind of scrub that into the surface. The clay is still pretty malleable, but the water helps it to become more malleable and can literally almost heal these cracks by pushing the areas on either side of the crack together with a little bit of water. Continue to work your pot using that pinching motion, keeping the walls of your pot consistent all the way around. When you're confident with the shape you've made, sit it out in the sun and allow 24 hours to dry. After a day of drying time, I went back in and poked a hole in the bottom of my pot. I want to use them as a planter, and so I'll need a place for the water to escape. Though these pots are not dish safe, I hope you've had a lot of fun and you've got a nice outdoor pot here. Thank you for joining us for today's project. I hope it gave you a new perspective on art making. Don't forget to check us out, ArtSpark Texas, on the link below, and we hope to see you next time. Bye. Thank you to our ArtSpark funders: Texas Commission on the Arts, Christopher and Dana Reeves Foundation, St. David's Foundation, Austin Public Library, Cultural Arts City of Austin, and the Donald D. Hamill Foundation.